Today we're going to walk through a scientific technique that allows you to learn and remember information for long-term use. No one ever taught me this in school, but I find that incredible because it's the only process that allows me to actually learn and remember important topics. While talking with a neuroscience professor, I learned that we have a map of information stored in our brain, and that, once we learn to access this map, we become somewhat superhuman. According to neuroscience, the best way to learn new information is to connect it with what you already know. Thus, knowing what you already know becomes vitally important in learning new information. This summer, I'm doing an internship in banking, but it has a focus on climate change. I know that I'm going to have to learn a lot of new information about renewable energy and different new types of climate change solutions. And so, as groundwork, I've tried to process what I already know about these topics. So I know a lot about finance over here. I have a finance degree and background, and I know a lot about this thing called the meta crisis, which a guy named Daniel Schmachtenberger talks a lot about, which is his understanding of the underlying drivers of basically why we have things like climate change and biodiversity, and why it's really difficult to escape these traps, as he calls them. So for climate change, I know a lot about the processes that contribute to methane emissions and to CO2 emissions, but I wanted to go even deeper. I wanted to ask the question, will we be able to effectively make this transition? And if so, how? Who are going to be the biggest key players, and how is this transition going to actually look like over the next few decades? To start this learning process, I literally just asked Google, how confident should I be in humanity's ability to meet our climate transition goals? This took me to an Excel page that the Department of Energy had created that mapped the cost and effectiveness of a bunch of different renewable energy propositions and transition plans. Boom, we've already started our descent down the rabbit hole of information. But we don't want to just go straight down the rabbit hole, get to the bottom, and then be done with it, because I found that you don't remember the information that well that way. You want to situate it in the context of the things you already know about. So I already know a little bit about how financing works and, the different ways a project can be undertaken by a company or government. So I'm going to situate that Excel file, remember that it's there, be able to access it whenever I want, and connect it to that idea, so that when in my internship this summer they say, hey, what are the most effective ways we could go about doing this, or companies asking us as a bank questions, I'm going to be able to reference that and give them an important perspective that is actually really well informed. Another thing that this initial question did for me was bring me to another adjacent topic, which I'd never heard of, which was anaerobic digestion, which is, something that I'd never heard of that I found really interesting, and I want to share a little bit with you guys. So it's a process that occurs naturally in things like landfills or lakes, where organic materials basically build up and through pressure and time release methane and CO2, which are the negative greenhouse gases that are causing the climate crisis. So there's this idea that you can capture those fumes and recycle them basically and use them for energy generation, which produces a net effect. And truthfully, I don't know how much I'm gonna have to know about this process or how much it's gonna come up, but I bet in the last 15 minutes of researching this that I've become one of the foremost scholars in the world on anaerobic digestion, which is kind of awesome. So another way that you can apply this mental map in a less maybe professional setting is just remembering what you know. I feel like we learn so much and then forget it all. So I went down this rabbit hole finding a new artist, right? They're called Aves, A-V-E-S. And I was blown away. They had some incredible music, and I highly recommend that you check them out. And I saw a word that I didn't know called paradisiac, which I had to learn up and learn how to pronounce. But this took me on just this wild goose chase of all these interesting topics. It brought me to a really successful decentralized finance game and role-playing game, which has all these new users, introduced me to a whole field of gaming that I'd never understood before, and this growing industry. And something that I had heard before was that you should basically find something that's working in one domain and try to copy and paste it to another platform. So if you have a role-playing game that works really well, you should try to copy and paste that same structure to a book format or comic book format or Audible format, and that it probably will work in that format too. In this video, I've tried to outline my way of thinking about learning new information and storing it properly. Hopefully it was useful to you guys. And for me, it's meaningful, right? I find this as part of my overarching, goal, which I'm not really sure why it's my goal, but it is, to be able to be confident and competent in any conversation I enter into. So now, whether they're the most foremost scholars on climate change or climate change financing, I'm going to be able to effectively participate in that conversation. I'm going to be able to add something of value. I think the scientific principle speaks deeply to my human nature, at least. I can't speak for everyone else, but I am a deeply curious person. I find that information is comforting to me. So when I have information about a complete environment, I'm able to enter it effectively and confidently, right? When you walk into a room, I kind of like to know who's there. It's like a safety blanket for me. If I know it, then I can meet it where it's at and I can confront it and overcome it and win. So my mental map that I have of the world comprises the largest intergalactic superstructures, the structure of our psyche from Carl Jung, and the atomic structure, right? So we have all these pieces kind of playing a role, but the important thing is that they each have their own place and that there are connections that you can draw between them, and that by having this somewhat formal map of knowledge in your mind, you're able to quickly draw connections between disparate ideas and topics, which I find to be an incredibly useful thing to be able to do. I think the intersection of diverse topics is where the coolest ideas and new products and services come from. Although this process of learning is somewhat draining in some ways, I find that it's one of the things that stimulates me to my very core. Like, this process of learning is so meaningful to me, and I'm trying to just communicate that and maybe even connect with people that share that love for learning and love for just talking about cool, important ideas. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I don't know how often I'm going to be able to make these because I'm starting my internship in a few days, but I hope to be able to keep making these. It's awesome for me, and I guess I'll see you on the next one, whenever that may be. Thanks a lot.